Marcus Reed, a dedicated janitor, was publicly humiliated and kicked out of Brightwell Industries' lobby in front of his colleagues. Charles Whitmore, the arrogant CEO, seemed to wield his power without consequence, treating others with disdain and cruelty. But Marcus had a secret plan, years of careful investments and strategy, and that morning he walked into the boardroom not as an employee, but as the new owner. Just wait until you see how Charles's arrogance backfired, and how justice finally found its way in this unforgettable turn of events. The lobby of Brightwell Industries was designed to impress. The marble floors reflected the morning light pouring through tall glass panels, and the chandeliers above glittered like crystal waterfalls. Everything about the place whispered wealth, order, and power. But behind that polish was the work of one man who was rarely acknowledged, Marcus Reed. Marcus had worked at Brightwell for almost a decade, long enough to know every corner of the building better than anyone else. He was the man who arrived before dawn, sweeping away yesterday's dust so executives could walk into a space that looked brand new every morning. He was reliable, quiet, and carried himself with a kind of dignity that didn't need words. For most employees, he blended into the background, invisible yet essential, like the rhythm of a heartbeat that no one notices until it falters. That morning, Marcus was doing what he always did, pushing his mop across the polished floor near the elevators, humming softly under his breath. He liked mornings. The building was calmer then, almost peaceful, before the storm of meetings and rushed footsteps began. But peace can shatter quickly, and it did when Charles Whitmore, Brightwell's CEO, swept into the lobby. Charles was the kind of man who seemed to carry the entire room with him wherever he went. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a custom suit with cufflinks that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. He walked like he owned the ground beneath his feet. And in truth, he did. Or at least he thought he did. His eyes landed on Marcus, who was wringing out his mop just as a group of junior managers stepped into the lobby. Charles's brow furrowed as though something distasteful had invaded his pristine kingdom. He slowed his stride, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble, and stopped just a few feet away. "What is this?" Charles said, not to Marcus directly, but to the lobby as though the building itself had failed him. His voice carried, deep and sharp, slicing through the quiet hum of conversation. Then, turning his gaze to Marcus, he added, "You people never know your place." The words dropped like stones into water, rippling across the room. Every employee within earshot stiffened. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A receptionist's hand froze above her keyboard. No one spoke. No one dared to. Charles wasn't done. He gestured toward the mop, his lips curling into a smirk. "I don't want to see you here again during business hours. Out! Now!" The command echoed in the silence. Marcus stood still for a moment, gripping the handle of the mop as though it could anchor him against the tide of humiliation that had just crashed over him. His chest tightened. He wasn't a man quick to anger. Life had taught him patience, restraint, and humility, but there was something about being dismissed in front of others, treated like clutter on the floor, that struck deeper than usual. He could feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes watching, yet none of them met his gaze. The employees standing nearby shifted uncomfortably, their faces caught between shock and the fear of being next in line for Charles's temper. No one spoke up. No one said, "This isn't right." They all turned into statues, unwilling to move. Marcus lowered his eyes. It wasn't submission, it was survival. He carefully placed the mop back into the bucket, the faint splash of water the only sound in the hushed lobby. Straightening his back, he walked toward the glass doors with slow, steady steps. He didn't run, didn't argue, didn't beg. That wasn't his way. But inside, the fire burned. Each step felt heavier, his mind replaying Charles's words again and again. "You people never know your place." It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration, a reminder of every closed door Marcus had faced in his life. A reminder that in Charles's eyes, he would never be more than the man with a mop. The glass doors slid open, and Marcus stepped out into the brisk morning air. Behind him, the lobby returned to life. Voices rose again, footsteps resumed, papers shuffled. But for Marcus, time had slowed. He stood on the sidewalk, his hands trembling slightly, the sting of humiliation sharper than the chill of the breeze. In that moment, it wasn't just about a mop, or a marble floor, or one CEO's arrogance. It was about dignity, about being stripped of it, in front of witnesses who chose silence over courage, and that wound cut deeper than any insult could. Marcus took a slow breath, his jaw tightening. The humiliation was real, the injustice undeniable. But what Charles didn't know, what no one in that lobby yet understood, was that this story was far from over. Outside the towering glass doors of Brightwell Industries, Marcus Reed paused on the sidewalk. The morning air was crisp, but instead of refreshing, it stung against his skin like tiny needles. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady the tightness in his chest. He had faced many hard days in his life, but something about this one pressed deeper, as if Charles Whitmore's words had reached into old scars and ripped them open again. Marcus wasn't just a janitor. He was a man who had worn many hats across his 52 years: delivery driver, warehouse hand, construction worker. Each job was another stepping stone, another attempt to build a life with dignity. And in each role, he had learned to endure the looks, the dismissive tones, the quiet assumptions about who he was and what he could become. He had swallowed those moments, hidden them away in silence, telling himself it wasn't worth the fight. But the words he heard that morning echoed louder than most. "You people never know your place." It wasn't the first time he had heard that sentiment. As a young man, he'd lost count of how many times opportunity slipped through his fingers because someone decided he didn't belong in the room. He remembered the job interview where he had been told, "We're looking for someone who fits our company image," after arriving in his only suit. He remembered walking into a bank years ago with a detailed business proposal, only to be brushed aside without the manager even glancing at his papers. Those weren't just rejections. They were quiet doors slamming in his face, each one a reminder of the box others tried to keep him in. Charles's words weren't new, but they carried the weight of every insult Marcus had endured. They reminded him of standing outside that bank, holding papers that no one wanted to see. They reminded him of the time his son had asked why people looked at him differently in certain places, and Marcus hadn't had the heart to answer. They reminded him of long nights mopping floors, wondering if this was all the world would ever allow him to be. The pain was layered. It wasn't just humiliation in the present, it was the echo of a lifetime of moments where his worth had been questioned, dismissed, or ignored. Marcus pressed his hand against the cool railing outside the building, steadying himself. For just a brief moment, the thought flickered in his mind. Maybe Charles was right. Maybe he would always be the man pushing the mop, invisible until someone wanted him gone. That was the cruelest cut of all, not the insult itself, but how easily it tempted him to believe it. The sidewalk buzzed with the rhythm of the city. Cars streamed past, horns blared, pedestrians hurried to their offices. None of them knew the storm that churned inside Marcus. To them, he was just another worker standing still against the rush of the morning. But inside, Marcus was fighting a heavier battle, the one between his past wounds and the strength he had always tried to carry. He tilted his head back, staring up at the skyscraper that rose above him. Brightwell's windows shimmered like mirrors against the sky, reflecting back an image of a man who looked tired, weathered, and, in that instant, powerless. The sight was almost unbearable. That was exactly what Charles saw when he looked at him. A man with no authority, no voice, no seat at the table. Marcus exhaled slowly, his breath leaving in a visible cloud. He tightened his jaw, forcing back the tide of despair threatening to drown him. The pain was sharp, but beneath it there was something else, a pulse, a reminder. He had been through worse. He had survived worse. Still, in that fragile moment, Marcus looked like the powerless man Charles believed him to be. And that image lingered, heavy and unshakable. What Charles, and everyone else inside those glass walls, didn't yet know was that Marcus's story wasn't finished. The very pain that threatened to pull him down was also the spark of something greater. But for now, standing on that cold sidewalk, Marcus carried the full weight of humiliation and a lifetime of doors shut in his face. And it hurt. Marcus Reed walked down the city sidewalk, each step measured, deliberate. The early morning sunlight glinted off the glass facades of the surrounding skyscrapers, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, focused on a plan few people knew about, a secret that had taken years to orchestrate. He wasn't just a janitor, not anymore. Weeks earlier, Marcus had quietly begun investing in companies, forming alliances, and building a network of support. He had studied financial reports late at night, learned the subtle dynamics of boardroom politics, and navigated contracts with patience most people would have deemed impossible. And in the shadows of his seemingly ordinary life, Marcus had acquired the rights that would soon allow him to purchase a controlling share of Brightwell Industries, the very company that had humiliated him this morning. Today was the day. The final papers, the official transfer, were waiting at the law office just a few blocks away. As he walked toward the building, Marcus felt a shift inside him, subtle but powerful. The sting of Charles Whitmore's words was still there, lingering at the edges, but it no longer controlled him. Instead, it sharpened his focus. Every insult, every dismissive look, every moment of overlooked effort had led him here. And now the balance of power was about to change. He passed a group of office workers hurrying to their morning meetings, briefcases clutched tightly. None of them recognized him. None of them guessed that the quiet man in a worn jacket was about to take control of the empire they all revered. That anonymity was a comfort. It reminded Marcus of how long he had observed, learned, and waited. Patience had always been his ally. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Not smug, not boastful, but calm, deliberate. Every cruel word Charles had spoken that morning, every sneer and every humiliation, was about to boomerang back in a way the CEO could never have imagined. Marcus felt a quiet thrill at the irony. The man who thought he held all the power had no idea the foundations beneath him were about to shift. He paused at the corner, adjusting the strap of his bag, and allowed himself a breath of clarity. For the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel invisible. The weight of his past struggles, the years of being dismissed and overlooked, had transformed into a sense of purpose. He felt seen, truly seen, not by those who had ignored him, but by himself. And that awareness was more powerful than any title, any suit, any office. Marcus approached the law office, a modest building tucked between towering banks and polished corporate facades. Its unassuming doors and quiet lobby seemed almost symbolic, a place where history could quietly be rewritten. The receptionist greeted him with a polite nod, unaware of the significance of his visit. Marcus nodded back, keeping his composure, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotion he had carried outside the Brightwell lobby. As he sat down in the waiting room, Marcus allowed himself another glance at the papers he had reviewed countless times over the past months. Each signature, each clause, each stipulation had been planned, negotiated, and secured. He was ready, he was prepared, and yet a subtle tension remained. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was anticipation, a reminder that change was never immediate, that power had to be claimed, not assumed. But Marcus no longer doubted his ability to rise to the moment. The sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the city streets. Marcus straightened in his chair, inhaling slowly, centering himself. The injustice he had endured that morning still stung, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it fueled him, like a silent engine propelling him toward a long-awaited reckoning. Today, he realized, he would step into a space that had once seemed unattainable. For the first time, Marcus wasn't just reacting to the world around him. He was shaping it, and in that quiet, powerful realization, hope blossomed. A hope so steady and luminous that it transformed humiliation into anticipation, weakness into preparation, and anger into the promise of triumph. Marcus Reed was ready. The Invisible Man was about to become the one everyone would notice. The executive boardroom of Brightwell Industries was tense that morning. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating polished mahogany tables and leather chairs, but the air felt thick, as if it were holding its breath. Charles Whitmore stormed in, his steps loud, his voice carrying the familiar disdain. "Where are these janitors?" he barked, tossing a glance around the room. "I can't believe the mess left in the lobby this morning." Who's responsible for this incompetence? The board members shifted uneasily, exchanging glances that betrayed their discomfort. Charles's arrogance filled the room like smoke, suffocating reason. Yet even as he continued his tirade, his eyes landed on something, or rather someone, that made him falter. Marcus Reed sat at the table, calm, composed, and unmistakably in control. Flanked by lawyers and senior board members, he looked like he belonged there, not as a visitor, not as an intruder, but as the rightful authority. The room seemed to contract around Charles as his words caught in his throat. Marcus's gaze met Charles's, steady and unwavering. "Mr. Whitmore," he said softly, the calmness of his tone slicing through the tension like a blade. "Funny seeing you again so soon. I believe these are the documents transferring ownership of Brightwell Industries into my name." The lawyers slid the contracts across the gleaming table. Charles's face paled, the color draining away like ink fading on parchment. Whispers spread across the boardroom, a wave of astonishment rippling from chair to chair. Marcus reached for the pen, his movements deliberate, precise. Each signature he placed on the papers felt like a quiet drumbeat of justice being restored. The room erupted in applause, a mixture of relief, awe, and celebration. Charles stammered, trying to find words that could explain, excuse, or undo the moment, but none came. Marcus stood slowly, his posture tall, unwavering. "You kicked me out of the lobby this morning," he said evenly, his voice carrying authority without arrogance. "But now, Mr. Whitmore, it's you who's out. Security will show you the door." Guards moved forward, escorting Charles without confrontation. His protests died in the echo of the polished walls, leaving him bewildered and defeated. The once feared CEO, who had cast a shadow over so many, was now reduced to a witness of his own reversal. Marcus turned to the room, his expression serene but firm. Employees who had once overlooked him, the assistants, interns, even the executive staff, looked on with new eyes. Some smiled with pride, some nodded in quiet respect, realizing the full measure of his journey. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. "No man should ever be judged by the work he does," Marcus said, his words carrying through the room like a statement of principle, a lesson that transcended the moment. "Respect is the foundation of leadership." There was a pause, a collective intake of breath as the weight of his words settled over everyone present. This wasn't just a victory over arrogance. It was a victory of patience, perseverance, and quiet dignity. Every slight, every insult, every dismissal that Marcus had endured over the years had culminated in this precise moment of justice. The lesson was clear, and its resonance extended beyond the walls of the boardroom. Humility, perseverance, and integrity could prevail where cruelty and arrogance had once ruled. The story of a man who was underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed had reached its triumphant peak. Marcus Reed wasn't merely the new owner of Brightwell Industries. He was a living testament to the idea that justice, though delayed, always finds a way. Outside the windows, the city hummed with life, unaware of the shift that had just occurred within the walls of the towering skyscraper. Inside, however, the atmosphere was electric. Witnesses would remember this day and the lessons it carried for years to come. Marcus's victory was not just personal. It was emblematic of the strength of character, resilience, and the enduring power of doing right, even when wrong seems to dominate. As Marcus took his seat at the head of the table, the room finally exhaled. Triumph had arrived, and with it came inspiration, a story that would not be forgotten, a life transformed, and a powerful reminder that respect and perseverance are never in vain.